Question 1. System analysis indicates that an applicant for a firearms license, Waffenschein in Bavaria, Germany, has declared a history of minor altercations in their personal life, though none resulted in formal charges or convictions. The applicant states these were isolated incidents, and they have since maintained a peaceful demeanor. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Automatically deny the application due to the mention of past altercations, as this indicates a potential predisposition towards conflict. Option B. Rely solely on the applicant's subjective assurance that the incidents were isolated and that they are now trustworthy without further verification. Option C. Approve the application based on the applicant's self-declaration of a peaceful demeanor and the absence of formal convictions. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's history, including checking relevant databases and potentially interviewing the applicant, to objectively assess their reliability and personal suitability according to the Waffengesetz. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's history, including checking relevant databases and potentially interviewing the applicant, to objectively assess their reliability and personal suitability according to the Waffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent safety and suitability requirements mandated by German firearms law, Waffengesetz WaffG. The applicant's history of minor altercations, even if resolved without formal charges, raises concerns about their temperament and potential for responsible firearm ownership. A superficial assessment could lead to either an unwarranted denial or an equally dangerous approval, both of which have serious legal and ethical ramifications. The decision-maker must meticulously apply the legal criteria to avoid personal bias and ensure public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, evidence-based assessment of the applicant's reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung, as defined by the Waffengesetz. This approach necessitates a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's statement and any supporting evidence. Crucially, it requires proactive investigation into the applicant's history, including checking relevant databases for any past incidents, even those not resulting in formal charges, and potentially conducting an interview to gauge their demeanor and understanding of firearm responsibilities. Decision-maker must then objectively evaluate whether the applicant meets the strict criteria for reliability, specifically addressing any concerns arising from past conflicts, and determine if they possess the necessary personal suitability to own and potentially carry a firearm without posing a risk to themselves or others. This aligns with the overarching goal of the WaffG to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of unreliable or unsuitable individuals. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the applicant's self-declaration and the absence of formal criminal convictions. This fails to meet the legal requirement for a proactive assessment of reliability. The Waffengesetz mandates that authorities actively investigate potential risks, and the absence of a conviction does not automatically equate to reliability. Ignoring past altercations, even if minor, could lead to approving an individual who may not be suitable. Another incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the application based on the mention of past altercations, without a thorough investigation. While caution is warranted, a blanket denial without due diligence is discriminatory and does not adhere to the principle of individual assessment required by the law. The law requires an objective evaluation of whether the past incidents demonstrate a lack of reliability or suitability, not an automatic disqualification. A further incorrect approach would be to approve the application based on a subjective feeling of trust in the applicant, without a systematic review of their history or a clear understanding of the legal requirements. Personal intuition is not a substitute for the legally mandated assessment of reliability and suitability, and such an approach could lead to a dangerous oversight. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a decision should employ a structured decision-making framework. This begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legal provisions, specifically the criteria for reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung, under the German Waffengesetz. The next step is to gather all available information, including the applicant's submission and any relevant background checks. This information must then be objectively analyzed against the legal criteria, paying particular attention to any red flags. If concerns arise, further investigation, such as an interview or consultation with relevant authorities, is warranted. The final decision must be documented, clearly articulating the reasoning based on the legal requirements and the evidence gathered, ensuring transparency and accountability. Question 2. Implementation of the German Waffengesetz requires careful consideration of an applicant's stated need for a firearm. If an applicant in Bavaria claims a need for a Waffenschein due to a perceived increase in local crime and a general feeling of insecurity, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Conduct a thorough investigation to verify the applicant's claims by seeking objective evidence of specific threats or a demonstrable risk to their personal safety, and assess if these circumstances meet the legal definition of necessity under the Waffengesetz. Option B. Issue the Waffenschein based on the applicant's subjective feeling of insecurity, as the law should prioritize individual perceptions of safety. Option C. Advise the applicant to obtain a firearm for self-defense and process the application without requiring further proof, assuming their concern is valid. Option D. Deny the Waffenschein immediately due to the subjective nature of the applicant's stated reasons, without further investigation, as general feelings of insecurity are not sufficient grounds. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough investigation to verify the applicant's claims by seeking objective evidence of specific threats or a demonstrable risk to their personal safety, and assess if these circumstances meet the legal definition of necessity under the Waffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent requirements of German firearms law, specifically the Waffengesetz (WaffG). The core challenge lies in objectively assessing the applicant's necessity, Bedürfnis, for a firearm, a subjective criterion that can be difficult to quantify and is prone to misinterpretation. A flawed assessment could lead to either an unjustified denial of a legitimate need or, more critically, the issuance of a permit to an individual who does not meet the legal threshold, potentially compromising public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, documented, and objective evaluation of the applicant's declared need against the specific criteria outlined in the Waffengesetz. This includes meticulously verifying the applicant's stated reasons for requiring a firearm, such as demonstrable threats to personal safety or participation in specific sporting activities requiring a firearm, and cross-referencing these with supporting evidence. The assessment must strictly adhere to the legal definitions of necessity, as interpreted by German authorities and case law, ensuring that the decision is grounded in factual evidence rather than assumptions or personal opinions. This approach upholds the legal framework by ensuring that only those who demonstrably meet the statutory requirements are granted a Waffenschein, thereby fulfilling the legislator's intent to permit firearm ownership only under specific, justified circumstances. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting the Waffenschein based solely on the applicant's assertion of needing it for self-defense, without requiring independent verification or evidence of a concrete, ongoing threat. This fails to meet the necessity requirement of the Waffengesetz, which demands more than a general fear of crime. It bypasses the legal obligation to assess the objective justification for the permit, potentially leading to the issuance of a permit to someone who does not legally qualify, and thus poses a risk. Another incorrect approach is to deny the Waffenschein based on a generalized, unsubstantiated concern about the applicant's background or perceived personality traits, without any specific evidence of unreliability or danger as defined by the Waffengesetz. This approach is discriminatory and lacks legal basis, as the Waffengesetz outlines specific grounds for refusal related to reliability and suitability, which must be factually established. Relying on vague impressions rather than concrete evidence violates due process and the principle of lawful administrative action. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize expediting the application process by overlooking or minimizing the importance of verifying supporting documentation, such as proof of membership in a shooting club or evidence of participation in competitive shooting sports, when the stated need is for sport. This shortcuts the due diligence required by the Waffengesetz and can lead to the issuance of permits to individuals who do not genuinely engage in the qualifying activities, undermining the integrity of the licensing system. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with evaluating Waffenschein applications in Germany should employ a structured decision-making framework. This framework begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant provisions of the Waffengesetz, particularly those pertaining to the definition and proof of necessity, Bedürfnis, and the grounds for refusal. The process should involve objective fact-finding, rigorous verification of all submitted information, and a critical assessment of whether the applicant's circumstances meet the legal threshold for a permit. Professionals must maintain impartiality, avoid personal biases, and base their decisions solely on the evidence presented and the applicable legal standards. When in doubt about the interpretation of the law or the sufficiency of evidence, seeking guidance from legal counsel or senior authorities within the licensing body is a crucial step in ensuring lawful and responsible decision-making. Question 3. To address the challenge of processing a firearms license, Waffenschein application in Bavaria, Germany, an applicant has stated a need for carrying a firearm primarily for personal protection due to perceived threats. What is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority to ensure compliance with the German Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG? Option A. Accept the applicant's self-assessment of their reliability and responsible handling capabilities without further investigation, provided they complete the basic application forms. Option B. Deny the Waffenschein application outright, citing general concerns about the proliferation of firearms and the potential for misuse, without conducting a specific assessment of the applicant's individual circumstances. Option C. Issue the Waffenschein immediately upon receiving the application, as the applicant has explicitly stated a need for personal protection, and the authority should not question their subjective perception of threat. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive background check. Verify the applicant's stated reasons for needing a firearm through objective evidence where possible, and conduct a detailed interview to assess their understanding of legal responsibilities and potential risks, ensuring their stated need does not contravene the prohibitions in Section 4 WaffG. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive background check. Verify the applicant's stated reasons for needing a firearm through objective evidence where possible, and conduct a detailed interview to assess their understanding of legal responsibilities and potential risks, ensuring their stated need does not contravene the prohibitions in Section 4 WaffG. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm with the stringent requirements of the German Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG, regarding reliability and suitability. The core of the challenge lies in assessing whether the applicant's personal circumstances and stated intentions genuinely align with the legal prerequisites for obtaining a Waffenschein, particularly concerning the prohibition of carrying firearms for purposes that could endanger public safety or order. A superficial assessment could lead to either an unjustified denial or, more critically, an unjustified approval, both of which carry significant legal and ethical ramifications. The best professional approach involves a thorough, objective, and legally compliant assessment of the applicant's entire situation. This means meticulously verifying all submitted documentation, conducting a comprehensive interview to probe the applicant's motivations and understanding of responsible firearm ownership, and critically evaluating the applicant's stated need against the legal criteria for issuing a permit. Specifically, the authorities must determine if the applicant's reasons for seeking a Waffenschein are legitimate and do not fall under the prohibitions outlined in Section 4 WaffG, which includes carrying firearms for purposes that could endanger public safety or order. This rigorous due diligence ensures that the decision is grounded in law and public safety, rather than mere assertion. An incorrect approach would be to grant the permit based solely on the applicant's assertion of needing it for self-defense, without independently verifying the legitimacy and necessity of this claim in the context of German law. This fails to meet the legal obligation to assess the applicant's suitability and the potential risks associated with issuing a permit. Another incorrect approach involves denying the permit solely based on a generalized concern about firearm ownership, without a specific, legally justifiable reason derived from the applicant's circumstances or the WaffG. This could be considered arbitrary and discriminatory. Finally, accepting the applicant's self-assessment of their own reliability without any independent verification or assessment of their understanding of legal responsibilities is also a failure, as the issuing authority bears the ultimate responsibility for ensuring the applicant is trustworthy and aware of the legal framework. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, objective evidence, and a risk-based assessment. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the WAFG, including grounds for refusal. 2. Gathering and verifying all relevant information from the applicant and other sources. 3. Conducting a thorough interview to assess the applicant's understanding, motivations, and potential risks. 4. Applying a consistent and objective evaluation against the legal criteria. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind it. Question 4. The review process indicates an applicant for a German firearms license, Waffenschein, has a documented history of 2 minor altercations that occurred 5 and 7 years ago, respectively. Both incidents were resolved without criminal charges and involved no weapons. The applicant has since maintained a stable employment record and has no other reported issues. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Automatically deny the Waffenschein application due to the presence of any past altercations, irrespective of their severity or recency. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the nature and context of the altercations, considering the applicant's subsequent conduct and overall reliability as per the Waffengesetz, WAFG. Option C. Require the applicant to undergo extensive psychological evaluation solely based on the past altercations. Option D. Grant the Waffenschein without further investigation, assuming that minor, non-violent incidents are irrelevant to firearms licensing. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed review of the nature and context of the altercations, considering the applicant's subsequent conduct and overall reliability as per the Waffengesetz, WAFG. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where an applicant for a German firearms license, Waffenschein, has a history of minor, non-violent altercations. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced interpretation of the legal requirements for obtaining a Waffenschein, specifically concerning the applicant's reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, as stipulated by the German Waffengesetz, WAFG. The authorities must balance the applicant's right to possess a firearm for legitimate purposes against the public safety imperative. A purely rigid application of rules might unfairly penalize an individual, while an overly lenient approach could compromise public safety. The correct approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's past conduct in light of the specific provisions of the WAFG concerning reliability. This means examining the nature, recency, and context of the altercations, as well as any evidence of rehabilitation or changed behavior. The authorities must determine if these past incidents demonstrate a lack of reliability that would pose a risk to public safety or the lawful handling of firearms, as required by WAFG Section 5. This approach aligns with the principle of proportionality and the need for a case-by-case evaluation mandated by German administrative law. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the Waffenschein based solely on the existence of any past altercations, regardless of their severity or context. This fails to acknowledge that the WAFG requires a determination of actual unreliability, not merely a past infraction. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the Waffenschein without any further scrutiny, assuming that minor altercations are irrelevant to firearms possession. This disregards the explicit requirement to assess reliability and could potentially endanger public safety. Finally, an approach that relies on subjective bias rather than objective legal criteria would also be professionally unacceptable, as it undermines the fairness and impartiality of the licensing process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legal provisions, WAFG Section 5. This framework should then involve gathering all pertinent information about the applicant, including the details of any past incidents. A critical evaluation of this information, considering the severity, frequency, and recency of the incidents, as well as any mitigating or aggravating factors, is essential. The decision must then be made based on whether the applicant demonstrably meets the reliability requirements of the WAFG, with a written justification for the outcome. Question 5. Examination of the data shows that an applicant in Bavaria has applied for a Waffenschein permit to carry, citing a general feeling of insecurity and a desire for personal protection due to recent crime statistics in their neighborhood. The applicant has no specific documented threats against them, but expresses a strong personal belief that they are at risk. What is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority? Option A. Deny the permit outright due to the general nature of the applicant's concerns and the lack of specific documented threats, as carrying permits are exceptions rather than the rule. Option B. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's specific circumstances, including a detailed personal interview, to assess the credibility of their claims and gather evidence of a demonstrable necessity for carrying a firearm, while also considering alternative security measures. Option C. Grant the permit immediately based on the applicant's subjective fear and their assertion of needing protection, as personal security is a fundamental right. Option D. Issue a warning to the applicant about the crime statistics and advise them to rely on law enforcement for protection, without further processing the permit application. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's specific circumstances, including a detailed personal interview, to assess the credibility of their claims and gather evidence of a demonstrable necessity for carrying a firearm, while also considering alternative security measures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the stringent requirements of German firearms law, specifically the Waffengesetz, WAFG. The issuing authority must assess the applicant's reliability, personal suitability, and the genuine necessity for carrying a firearm, all while adhering to the principle of proportionality and avoiding arbitrary decisions. The potential for misuse of a firearm necessitates a thorough and objective evaluation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous review of all submitted documentation and a comprehensive personal interview to assess the applicant's credibility and the factual basis of their stated necessity. This approach aligns with the WAFG's emphasis on objective assessment of the applicant's circumstances and their demonstrated need for self-defense, as outlined in sections like Section 28 WAFG concerning the necessity of a permit. It requires the authority to gather evidence beyond the applicant's self-reporting, such as corroborating statements or evidence of specific threats, to justify the issuance of a permit. This ensures that permits are granted only when a demonstrable and significant risk exists that cannot be mitigated by other means. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the permit solely based on the applicant's subjective fear and assertion of needing protection, without independent verification or a deeper investigation into the specific nature and imminence of the threats. This fails to meet the WAFG's requirement for a demonstrable necessity and risks issuing permits without adequate justification, undermining public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is to summarily deny the permit based on a general reluctance to issue carrying permits, without a thorough assessment of the applicant's specific circumstances and the evidence presented. This could be considered an arbitrary denial and may not align with the WAFG's provisions for granting permits when genuine necessity is proven. The authority must engage in a case-by-case evaluation. A third incorrect approach is to focus excessively on the applicant's perceived character traits without a direct link to their reliability or suitability for firearm possession, as defined by the WAFG. While character is relevant, the assessment must be grounded in specific criteria outlined in the law, such as past criminal behavior or evidence of psychological instability that directly impacts their ability to safely handle a firearm. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evidence and adherence to legal requirements. This involves 1. Thoroughly reviewing all submitted documentation. 2. Conducting a detailed personal interview to probe the applicant's claims and assess their demeanor and credibility. 3. Seeking independent corroboration of any asserted threats or dangers. 4. Applying the specific criteria for necessity and suitability as defined in the Waffengesetz. 5. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for granting or denying the permit, to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 6. Upon reviewing an application for a Waffenschein in Bavaria, Germany, an applicant expresses a profound sense of unease and fear for their personal safety due to recent, but unsubstantiated, rumors of increased criminal activity in their neighborhood. They have no specific threats against them but feel a general vulnerability. What is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority? Option A. Issue the Waffenschein based on the applicant's expressed fear and the general perception of rising crime, as a precautionary measure to ensure their sense of security. Option B. Postpone the decision indefinitely, requesting a comprehensive psychological evaluation of the applicant to assess their general anxiety levels. Option C. Require the applicant to provide concrete, verifiable evidence of a specific, credible, and current threat to their life or physical well-being that cannot be mitigated by other means, while also verifying their reliability and personal suitability according to the Bundeswaffengesetz. Option D. Deny the application outright, citing personal reservations about the proliferation of firearms in civilian hands, irrespective of the applicant's stated concerns. The correct answer is C. Require the applicant to provide concrete, verifiable evidence of a specific, credible, and current threat to their life or physical well-being that cannot be mitigated by other means, while also verifying their reliability and personal suitability according to the Bundeswaffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the strict legal requirements for obtaining a Waffenschein in Germany. The issuing authority must assess the credibility of the threat and the applicant's suitability without succumbing to emotional appeals or making assumptions. The decision hinges on objective evidence and adherence to the Bundeswaffengesetz, WAFG. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated need for self-defense, strictly adhering to the requirements outlined in the Bundeswaffengesetz, WAFG. This means demanding concrete evidence of a credible, current, and significant threat to the applicant's life or physical well-being that cannot be adequately addressed by other means. The authority must verify the applicant's reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Einung, through background checks and potentially by consulting with law enforcement. The decision must be based on documented facts and legal criteria, not on the applicant's subjective feelings of insecurity or the perceived severity of potential future threats without concrete evidence. This approach ensures compliance with Section 2 ABS 1 WAFG and Section 4 WAFG, which stipulate the necessity and the applicant's suitability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the Waffenschein based solely on the applicant's fear and a general statement about potential future threats, without requiring specific, verifiable evidence of an immediate danger. This fails to meet the legal standard of a bedürftige person in need, as defined by the WAFG, which requires more than mere apprehension. Another incorrect approach is to deny the Waffenschein based on a personal belief that firearms are inherently dangerous, regardless of the applicant's demonstrated need and suitability. This introduces subjective bias and disregards the legal framework that permits firearm ownership under specific, regulated circumstances. The decision must be based on legal criteria, not personal philosophy. A further incorrect approach is to delay the decision indefinitely by requesting an excessive amount of irrelevant documentation, or by failing to provide clear guidance on what evidence is required. This can be seen as an administrative obstruction and does not align with the duty to process applications in a timely and legally compliant manner. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evidence and legal compliance. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the legal requirements of the relevant jurisdiction, in this case, the German Bundeswaffengesetz. 2. Systematically gathering and verifying all necessary documentation and information pertaining to the applicant's need, reliability, and suitability. 3. Objectively evaluating the evidence against the established legal criteria, ensuring that the decision is fact-based and free from personal bias or emotional influence. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process thoroughly, including the rationale for granting or denying the application. 5. Communicating the decision clearly and providing justification, especially in cases of denial, referencing the specific legal provisions. Question 7. When evaluating an application for a firearms license, Waffenschein, in Bavaria, Germany, based on a claim of immediate personal threat, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Issue the firearms license immediately due to the applicant's expressed fear and distress, as the primary purpose of a Waffenschein is to provide a sense of security. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive investigation into the nature and credibility of the alleged threat. Verify the applicant's personal reliability and capacity to handle a firearm safely, and assess if the threat meets the stringent legal threshold for self-defense under the Waffengesetz. Option C. Deny the firearms license solely based on the applicant's admission of fear, as individuals experiencing significant fear may be deemed unreliable or prone to impulsive action. Option D. Grant the firearms license based on the applicant's personal testimony and the recommendation of a close friend, without further independent verification of the threat or the applicant's suitability. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive investigation into the nature and credibility of the alleged threat, verify the applicant's personal reliability and capacity to handle a firearm safely, and assess if the threat meets the stringent legal threshold for self-defense under the Waffenschein. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense against the stringent requirements of German firearms law, specifically the Waffengesetz, WaFG. The issuing authority must assess the credibility of the threat and the applicant's suitability without succumbing to emotional appeals or making assumptions. The decision hinges on objective evidence and adherence to legal criteria, not subjective feelings. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated need for self-defense, strictly adhering to the criteria outlined in the German Waffengesetz. This means verifying the existence of a concrete, present, and significant threat to the applicant's life, limb, or liberty, and evaluating the applicant's personal reliability, Zuverlässigkeit and capacity, Befähigung, to handle a firearm safely. This approach is correct because it directly implements the legal framework, ensuring that a firearms license is granted only when the statutory requirements are demonstrably met, thereby upholding public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. The WaFG mandates a high threshold for demonstrating a need for self-defense, requiring more than mere apprehension or general fear. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting the license based primarily on the applicant's emotional distress and perceived vulnerability, without independently verifying the threat or assessing the applicant's suitability according to WaFG standards. This fails to meet the legal requirement for a concrete and significant threat and risks issuing a license to someone who may not be objectively safe to possess a firearm. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license solely because the applicant expresses fear, without conducting a comprehensive investigation into the nature and credibility of the alleged threat and the applicant's overall reliability. This could be an arbitrary denial and may not align with the WaFG's provisions if a genuine, verifiable threat exists and the applicant meets all other criteria. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely on informal assurances from the applicant or their acquaintances without seeking official documentation or conducting thorough background checks, as this bypasses the due diligence required by law and could lead to a flawed decision. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evidence and legal compliance. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the legal requirements of the Waffengesetz for a firearms license, particularly concerning the need for self-defense and personal suitability. 2. Gathering all relevant documentation and conducting thorough investigations to verify the applicant's claims and assess their reliability. 3. Objectively evaluating the evidence against the legal criteria, distinguishing between subjective feelings and demonstrable facts. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the evidence considered and the reasoning behind the final decision, to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 8. The analysis reveals that an individual in Bavaria, Germany, has applied for a Waffenschein, citing a persistent feeling of being watched and a general sense of unease in their neighborhood, but has provided no specific incidents, threats, or evidence to corroborate these feelings. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the requirements of the German Waffengesetz for issuing a permit to carry a firearm? Option A. Focus the assessment primarily on the applicant's general character and past minor disputes, assuming that a person prone to such issues might genuinely feel threatened. Option B. Issue the Waffenschein based on the applicant's subjective fear and stated unease, as personal security is a paramount concern. Option C. Deny the application immediately due to the lack of concrete evidence, without further investigation into the applicant's concerns. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation to objectively verify the existence of specific threats or dangers to the applicant's life, limb, or property that necessitate carrying a firearm, and assess if the applicant meets all other legal requirements for reliability and suitability. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation to objectively verify the existence of specific threats or dangers to the applicant's life, limb, or property that necessitate carrying a firearm, and assess if the applicant meets all other legal requirements for reliability and suitability. Explanation: the analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between an individual's perceived need for self-protection and the strict legal requirements for firearm possession and carrying in Germany. The applicant's history of perceived threats, while subjectively distressing, does not automatically translate into objective grounds for a Waffenschein under German law. The core challenge lies in balancing the applicant's personal anxieties with the paramount public safety concerns and the stringent evidentiary standards mandated by the Waffengesetz, WAFG. A careful judgment is required to avoid either unduly denying a legitimate need for protection or irresponsibly granting a permit that could compromise public safety. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated reasons for needing a permit to carry a firearm, strictly adhering to the criteria outlined in the German Waffengesetz. This means evaluating whether the applicant has demonstrated a need, Bedürfnis, for carrying a firearm, which is typically established through concrete, verifiable threats to life, limb, or property that cannot be adequately addressed by other means. The authorities must meticulously examine any evidence provided by the applicant, such as police reports, court documents, or credible witness statements, to substantiate these threats. The decision must be grounded in the legal requirements for a need, as defined by Section 7 WAFG, and the general principles of public safety, ensuring that the permit is issued only when objective circumstances necessitate it, and the applicant meets all other legal prerequisites, including reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung. An incorrect approach would be to grant the permit based solely on the applicant's subjective feelings of insecurity or fear, without independent, objective verification of the threats. This fails to meet the legal standard of need and prioritizes personal sentiment over statutory requirements, potentially leading to the issuance of a permit to someone who does not meet the legal threshold, and thus poses an unnecessary risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to summarily dismiss the application based on a superficial review of the applicant's concerns, without conducting a comprehensive investigation into the alleged threats. While objective evidence is crucial, a complete disregard for the applicant's stated fears, without due diligence to investigate their validity, could be seen as an overreach or a failure to properly assess the situation, though the primary failure remains the lack of objective justification for the permit. A further incorrect approach would be to focus on the applicant's perceived character or past minor infractions unrelated to the specific grounds for a Waffenschein, rather than the objective need for carrying a firearm. While reliability and suitability are assessed, the core of the application for a permit to carry hinges on the demonstrable need, and diverting the assessment to irrelevant personal attributes without addressing the primary legal criterion is a misapplication of the law. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal requirements of the Waffengesetz. This involves identifying the specific criteria for a Waffenschein, particularly the demonstration of a need. The next step is to gather all relevant information and evidence from the applicant and, where necessary, from external sources. This evidence must then be objectively evaluated against the legal standards. The decision-making process should be transparent, documented, and defensible, ensuring that it is based on facts and legal provisions, rather than subjective impressions or assumptions. Question 9. Comparative studies suggest that when evaluating an application for a firearms permit, Waffenschein, in Germany based on a claimed need for self-defense, authorities face complex ethical and legal considerations. Considering the strict provisions of the German Waffengesetz, which approach best reflects the required professional judgment and adherence to legal frameworks. Option A. Grant the permit if the applicant demonstrates a high level of financial security and social standing, assuming these factors correlate with responsible firearm ownership. Option B. Deny the application immediately upon receipt, citing the general difficulty in obtaining firearms permits in Germany and the inherent risks associated with civilian firearm ownership. Option C. Issue the permit based on the applicant's sincere expression of fear and a general desire to enhance their personal security without requiring extensive objective proof of a specific threat. Option D. Conduct a rigorous, evidence-based assessment of the applicant's stated need for self-defense, verifying the existence of a concrete, significant, and unavoidable threat, alongside a thorough evaluation of the applicant's trustworthiness and personal suitability as mandated by the Waffengesetz. The correct answer is D. Conduct a rigorous, evidence-based assessment of the applicant's stated need for self-defense, verifying the existence of a concrete, significant, and unavoidable threat, alongside a thorough evaluation of the applicant's trustworthiness and personal suitability as mandated by the Waffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for self-defense with the stringent requirements of German firearms law, specifically the Waffengesetz, WaffG. The issuing authority must assess the credibility of the threat and the applicant's suitability without succumbing to emotional appeals or making assumptions. The decision hinges on objective evidence and adherence to legal criteria, not subjective feelings. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated need for self-defense, rigorously evaluating it against the criteria outlined in the Waffengesetz. This means demanding concrete evidence of a present, significant, and unavoidable threat to life, limb, or liberty that cannot be adequately addressed by other means. The authority must verify the applicant's trustworthiness, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Einung, through background checks, psychological evaluations if deemed necessary, and confirmation of their knowledge of firearms law and safe handling. This approach aligns directly with the legal mandate to ensure firearms are only issued to individuals who demonstrably meet all statutory requirements, prioritizing public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to grant the permit based solely on the applicant's emotional testimony of fear and a general desire for personal safety. This fails to meet the Waffengesetz's requirement for a concrete, demonstrable threat and bypasses the necessary objective verification of trustworthiness and suitability. Prioritizes subjective feelings over legal mandates, creating a significant public safety risk. Another incorrect approach is to deny the permit outright without a comprehensive review of the evidence presented, simply because firearms permits are generally difficult to obtain. This demonstrates a failure to apply the law fairly and objectively. While the threshold is high, the law does provide for permits under specific, proven circumstances. Blanket denial without due diligence is a dereliction of duty. A third incorrect approach is to focus excessively on the applicant's perceived financial stability or social standing as a proxy for trustworthiness. While certain aspects of suitability might be indirectly influenced by an individual's life circumstances, the Waffengesetz mandates specific checks for reliability and personal aptitude, not a judgment based on wealth or status. This approach misinterprets the legal requirements and introduces irrelevant criteria. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must employ a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the Waffengesetz for the type of permit sought. 2. Objectively evaluating all submitted evidence against these legal criteria. 3. Conducting thorough background and suitability checks as mandated by law. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for granting or denying the permit, with clear references to the legal provisions. 5. Remaining impartial and avoiding personal biases or emotional responses. Over the past 12 months, their sales data for 3 specific firearm categories are as follows. Category A. Month 1, 3 units, month 2, 5 units, month 3, 4 units, month 4, 6 units, month 5, 3 units, month 6, 7 units, month 7, 4 units, month 8, 5 units, month 9, 3 units, month 10, 6 units, month 11, 4 units, month 12, 5 units. Category B. Month 1, 10 units, month 2, 12 units, month 3, 15 units, month 4, 11 units, month 5, 13 units, month 6, 14 units, month 7, 16 units, month 8, 10 units, month 9, 12 units, month 10, 15 units, month 11, 11 units, month 12, 13 units. Category C. Month 1, 5 units, month 2, 5 units, month 3, 6 units, month 4, 5 units, month 5, 7 units, month 6, 5 units, month 7, 6 units, month 8, 5 units, month 9, 7 units, month 10, 5 units, month 11, 6 units month 12, 5 units according to the German Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG, and relevant Bavarian implementing regulations. A dealer's stock of a particular firearm category cannot exceed 10 times the average monthly sales of that category over the preceding 12 months, with an absolute maximum of 50 units per category. Question 10. The investigation demonstrates that a licensed firearms dealer in Bavaria, Germany, is reviewing their inventory levels for the upcoming quarter. What is the maximum number of units the dealer can legally stock for each category in the upcoming quarter? Option A. Category A, 40 units. Category B, 130 units. Category C, 60 units. Option B. Category A, 50 units. Category B, 50 units. Category C, 50 units. Option C. Category A, 50 units. Category B, 130 units. Category C, 60 units. Option D. Category A, 40 units. Category B, 50 units. Category C, 50 units. The correct answer is D. Category A, 40 units. Category B, 50 units. Category C, 50 units. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a firearms dealer in Bavaria, Germany, is facing a complex calculation regarding the permissible stock levels of certain firearms based on their licensing and sales data. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires not only an understanding of the German Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG, and relevant Bavarian implementing regulations, but also precise mathematical application to ensure compliance. Errors in calculation can lead to significant legal repercussions, including fines and revocation of the firearms license. The correct approach involves a meticulous calculation of the average monthly sales for each firearm category over the preceding 12 months, and then applying the statutory limit of 10 times this average for each category, ensuring that no single category exceeds the absolute maximum of 50 units. This method directly adheres to the principles of responsible firearms management and the specific quantitative restrictions outlined in the WaffG, which aim to prevent excessive stockpiling and ensure that dealers maintain only a reasonable inventory commensurate with their demonstrated sales volume. An incorrect approach would be to simply use the highest monthly sales figure from the past year and multiply it by 10, as this would likely result in an inflated stock level that exceeds the spirit and letter of the law, potentially leading to an unlawful inventory. Another incorrect approach would be to sum the total sales for the year and divide by 12 to get an average, but then fail to cap the individual category limits at 50 units, thereby ignoring a crucial absolute maximum stipulated by the regulations. Finally, an approach that relies on a subjective assessment of reasonable stock without adhering to the defined mathematical formula would be a clear violation of the regulatory framework, as it introduces arbitrariness where precise calculation is mandated. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This involves first thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements for inventory management, including any applicable formulas or thresholds. Then, they must gather accurate sales data and perform the calculations with utmost precision, cross-referencing the results against all stipulated limits. Finally, maintaining detailed records of these calculations and the basis for them is crucial for demonstrating compliance during any inspection. Question 11. Analysis of a scenario where an applicant for a firearms license, Waffenschein, in Germany has a past incident involving a public altercation that was handled by the police, but the applicant is considering not mentioning it on their application form, believing it was minor and resolved. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to ensure compliance with German firearms regulations? Option A. Omit the past altercation from the application, assuming that minor incidents not resulting in a conviction will not be discovered or affect the application. Option B. Consult with a friend who has a firearms license in another country to understand how similar situations are handled elsewhere before deciding on disclosure. Option C. Provide a heavily redacted or minimized account of the altercation, focusing only on aspects that portray the applicant in the most favorable light. Option D. Fully disclose the past altercation to the German authorities, providing all relevant details, and allow them to assess its impact on their reliability and personal suitability. Correct answer is D. Fully disclose the past altercation to the German authorities, providing all relevant details, and allow them to assess its impact on their reliability and personal suitability. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the complex and sensitive requirements for obtaining a firearms license, Waffenschein in Germany, specifically concerning the assessment of reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting information during the application process can lead to severe legal consequences, including the denial of the license, potential criminal charges, and a lasting negative record that impacts future applications. The authorities are obligated to conduct a thorough investigation, and applicants must be transparent and truthful. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves complete and accurate disclosure of all relevant information to the relevant German authorities, e.g., the local Ordnungsamt or Kreisverwaltungsreferat. This includes proactively informing them about any past incidents, even those that may seem minor or have been resolved, such as the reported altercation. The German Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG, places a high burden on applicants to demonstrate their reliability and suitability. Section 5 of the WaffG outlines the criteria for reliability, which can be negatively impacted by certain criminal convictions or behaviors that indicate a disregard for the law or a propensity for violence. By disclosing the past incident, the applicant allows the authorities to make an informed decision based on the full picture, rather than discovering it later, which would likely lead to a negative outcome. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of honesty and the legal requirement for full disclosure in official applications. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to mention the past altercation, hoping it will not be discovered, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This constitutes a misrepresentation of facts and a lack of transparency, directly undermining the assessment of reliability required by the WaffG. The authorities conduct background checks, and if the incident is discovered, it will be viewed as an attempt to deceive, leading to an almost certain denial of the Waffenschein and potential legal repercussions. Providing only partial information about the altercation, such as downplaying its severity or omitting details about the police involvement, is also a regulatory and ethical failure. This is a form of misleading the authorities. While not a complete omission, it still prevents a full and accurate assessment of the applicant's character and potential risks, which is the core purpose of the reliability assessment under the WaffG. Seeking advice from an individual who is not a legal expert or familiar with German firearms law regarding how to present the information is a risky approach. While seeking advice is not inherently wrong, relying on unqualified advice could lead to strategies that are not compliant with the WaffG, potentially resulting in the same negative consequences as direct misrepresentation. The responsibility for accurate disclosure rests solely with the applicant. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. The decision-making process should prioritize adherence to legal requirements and ethical principles. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal framework, in this case, the German Waffengesetz and its provisions on reliability and suitability. 2. Conducting a thorough self-assessment of any past events that might be relevant to the application criteria. 3. Seeking advice from qualified legal professionals, specializing in German firearms law if there is any doubt about disclosure requirements, or how to present information accurately. 4. Disclosing all relevant information truthfully and completely to the authorities, allowing them to make an informed decision. Question 12. Consider a scenario in Germany where an individual applies for a firearms license, Waffenschein, and states a need for self-protection due to ongoing disputes with a neighbor. The applicant's file indicates several reports of domestic disturbances involving shouting and threats, though none have resulted in criminal charges or restraining orders. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Issue a provisional firearms license while further investigating the neighbor disputes, allowing the applicant to carry a firearm for self-protection during the interim period. Option B. Grant the firearms license immediately based on the applicant's stated need for self-protection, as the absence of criminal convictions means there is no legal impediment. Option C. Deny the firearms license solely on the basis of the reported domestic disturbances, regardless of their outcome or the applicant's current behavior, to err on the side of caution. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and frequency of the reported domestic disturbances, review all available documentation, and assess the applicant's overall reliability and personal suitability for firearm possession in accordance with the German Waffengesetz, potentially requiring further evidence or assessments. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature and frequency of the reported domestic disturbances, review all available documentation, and assess the applicant's overall reliability and personal suitability for firearm possession in accordance with the German Waffengesetz, potentially requiring further evidence or assessments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the state's responsibility to maintain public safety through strict regulation of firearms. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal convictions, raises significant concerns about their suitability to possess a firearm. The core challenge lies in balancing the applicant's stated need for self-protection against the potential risk they may pose to themselves or others, requiring a thorough and objective assessment that adheres strictly to German firearms law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive evaluation of the applicant's reliability and personal suitability, as mandated by the German Waffengesetz, WAFG. This includes a detailed review of all submitted documentation, a thorough investigation into the reported domestic disputes, even if not leading to formal charges, and potentially requiring a psychological assessment if there are doubts about the applicant's mental stability or judgment. The primary regulatory requirement is to ensure that the applicant is demonstrably trustworthy and not likely to misuse a firearm. The WAFG, particularly sections concerning reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung, places a significant burden on the applicant to prove they meet these stringent criteria. The authorities must consider any information that casts doubt on their suitability, including past conflicts and potential for aggression, to uphold public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. Granting the license solely based on the applicant's assertion of needing protection without a deeper investigation into the domestic disputes would be a significant regulatory failure. This approach ignores the explicit requirements of the WAFG regarding reliability and personal suitability, which demand more than just a stated need. Risks placing a firearm in the hands of an individual whose past behavior suggests a potential for instability or misuse. Denying the license solely because of the domestic disputes, without a thorough assessment of their nature and the applicant's current circumstances, could also be problematic if the disputes were minor, resolved, or did not indicate a lack of reliability. While caution is paramount, an outright denial without due diligence might be seen as an arbitrary decision, failing to consider the full context and the applicant's right to demonstrate their suitability. However, in this specific scenario, the repeated nature of the disputes would strongly lean towards a denial based on reliability concerns. Focusing only on the absence of criminal convictions would be a critical oversight. German firearms law does not limit the assessment of reliability solely to criminal records. Past behavior, even if not criminalized, can provide strong indicators of potential future risks, and these must be considered by the licensing authority. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based, evidence-driven approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Thoroughly reviewing all application materials and supporting documents. 2. Investigating any red flags or concerning information, such as the reported domestic disputes, by seeking further details and potentially contacting relevant parties or authorities. 3. Applying the specific criteria for reliability and personal suitability as defined by the WAFG, considering the totality of the circumstances. 4. Documenting all findings and the rationale for the decision meticulously. 5. If doubts persist after investigation, seeking expert opinions, such as psychological evaluation, to inform the final decision. 6. Prioritizing public safety while ensuring fair and objective assessment of the applicant. Question 13. During the evaluation of an application for a firearms license, Waffenschein, in Bavaria, Germany, an applicant has a minor conviction for a public disturbance offense from over 10 years ago, which was expunged from their record. They also claim a general need for self-defense due to living in a neighborhood with a perceived increase in petty crime, but provide no specific incidents or threats. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Immediately deny the application based on the past conviction, regardless of its age or expungement, and the unsubstantiated claim of self-defense. Option B. Issue the firearms license based on the applicant's assertion of a need for self-defense, assuming that the expunged record is no longer relevant and the applicant's concern about crime is sufficient justification. Option C. Request detailed documentation and a written explanation from the applicant regarding the past conviction and the specific circumstances leading to their perceived need for self-defense, while also verifying the expungement status and assessing the overall reliability and suitability based on all submitted information. Option D. Advise the applicant to obtain a character reference from a local police officer to vouch for their good character and approve the license if the reference is positive, without further investigation into the past conviction or the specific self-defense needs. The correct answer is C. Request detailed documentation and a written explanation from the applicant regarding the past conviction and the specific circumstances leading to their perceived need for self-defense, while also verifying the expungement status and assessing the overall reliability and suitability based on all submitted information. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only a genuine need for a firearm, but also the capacity to handle it responsibly, all within the strict legal framework of German firearms law, Waffengesetz WaffG. The authorities must balance the individual's right to self-defense or sport shooting with the paramount public safety interest. Misinterpreting or misrepresenting information can lead to the denial of a license, or worse, the issuance of a license to an unsuitable individual, with severe legal and ethical repercussions. The correct approach involves a thorough and honest disclosure of all relevant information, including any past incidents that might be perceived negatively, and providing clear, verifiable evidence of a legitimate need for a firearm. This aligns with the principles of the Waffengesetz, which mandates that applicants must prove reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung. Specifically, Section 6, WaffG outlines the requirements for reliability, which includes assessing whether the applicant has demonstrated consistent adherence to the law and has no history of criminal behavior or substance abuse that would call their suitability into question. Providing comprehensive documentation, such as proof of membership in a shooting club for sport shooters or a detailed explanation of a credible threat for self-defense purposes, directly addresses these legal requirements. An incorrect approach would be to omit or downplay any past legal issues, such as a minor conviction for assault, even if it occurred many years ago. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of the applicant's duty to provide truthful information during the licensing process. Under Section 36, WaffG, providing false information or concealing relevant facts can lead to the immediate denial of the application and potential criminal charges. Furthermore, failing to provide concrete evidence for the stated need, such as vague claims of needing protection without specific threats or incidents, does not meet the burden of proof required by the WaffG. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the rigorous evidentiary standards necessary for obtaining a Waffenschein. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on a friend's testimony without providing independent, verifiable documentation of the need or the applicant's suitability. While character references can be part of an application, they are not a substitute for the applicant's own demonstrable qualifications and the objective assessment of their reliability and suitability as mandated by law. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, thoroughness, and strict adherence to the Waffengesetz. This involves meticulously gathering all required documentation, honestly addressing any potential red flags in the applicant's history, and clearly articulating and substantiating the legitimate need for a firearm. When in doubt about the interpretation of a specific regulation or the sufficiency of evidence, seeking clarification from the relevant licensing authority or consulting with legal counsel specializing in firearms law is a prudent step. Question 14. Research into an application for a Waffenschein firearms license in Bavaria, Germany, has revealed that the applicant, while having no criminal convictions, has been involved in 2 documented domestic disputes within the past 5 years, which were resolved without formal charges. The applicant claims these were isolated incidents and that they have since undergone anger management. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the Waffenschein with extremely restrictive conditions, such as requiring the applicant to store the firearm at a police station when not in immediate use. Option B. Deny the Waffenschein outright based on the documented history of domestic disputes, regardless of the applicant's claims of resolution or anger management. Option C. Grant the Waffenschein immediately as the applicant has no criminal convictions, and the disputes did not result in formal charges. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the domestic disputes, seeking corroborating evidence and assessing the applicant's current personal reliability and suitability, potentially requiring further documentation or interviews before making a decision. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the domestic disputes, seeking corroborating evidence and assessing the applicant's current personal reliability and suitability, potentially requiring further documentation or interviews before making a decision. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing an individual's right to self-defense with the stringent public safety requirements mandated by German firearms law. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal convictions, raises significant concerns about their suitability to possess a firearm, as it indicates potential issues with impulse control and responsible handling of conflict. A thorough assessment must prioritize public safety and adherence to the Waffengesetz (WAF-G). The best professional approach involves a comprehensive evaluation of the applicant's reliability and personal suitability, as stipulated by Section 5 WAF-G. This includes a detailed investigation into the reported domestic disputes, seeking corroborating evidence and assessing the applicant's current mental state and propensity for violence. The authorities must consider whether the applicant's past behavior demonstrates a lack of the necessary personal reliability, persoonlijke zuverlässigheid, or suitability, persoonlijke aanleg, to possess a firearm, which are fundamental prerequisites for obtaining a Waffenschein. This approach directly addresses the legal requirements and prioritizes public safety by thoroughly vetting potential risks. An incorrect approach would be to grant the Waffenschein based solely on the absence of criminal convictions. This fails to acknowledge that German firearms law requires more than just a clean criminal record. It demands a proactive assessment of an individual's overall reliability and suitability. Ignoring documented instances of domestic disputes, even without convictions, demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and could lead to a dangerous individual possessing a firearm. Another incorrect approach would be to deny the Waffenschein solely based on the allegations of domestic disputes without a thorough investigation. While caution is warranted, a denial must be supported by evidence demonstrating a lack of reliability or suitability. A blanket denial without due process or a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's current circumstances and character would be procedurally unfair and potentially unlawful. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to issue the Waffenschein with overly restrictive conditions that are not legally justifiable or practical. While conditions can be imposed under Section 7 WAF-G, they must be directly related to mitigating identified risks and must be proportionate. Imposing arbitrary or excessively burdensome conditions without a clear legal basis would be an improper exercise of authority. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicant's submission and any reported concerns. This involves gathering all relevant information, including police reports, witness statements, and the applicant's own account. The next step is to critically assess this information against the specific legal criteria outlined in the Waffengesetz, particularly concerning personal reliability and suitability. If significant concerns remain after this assessment, further investigation or interviews are necessary. The final decision must be clearly reasoned, legally sound, and demonstrably based on the evidence and the requirements of the WAF-G, always prioritizing public safety. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that an applicant for a Waffenschein in Bavaria has submitted all standard application forms and provided a clean criminal record. However, the applicant's personal history section mentions several documented instances of heated domestic disputes with a former partner over the past 5 years, none of which resulted in formal charges or convictions. How should the licensing authority proceed? Option A. Issue the Waffenschein immediately, as the absence of a criminal record and complete application forms satisfy the basic requirements. Option B. Request a psychological evaluation of the applicant to determine their suitability without conducting an initial personal interview. Option C. Deny the Waffenschein based solely on the mention of domestic disputes, regardless of the lack of formal charges, as this indicates a potential risk. Option D. Conduct a detailed personal interview with the applicant to thoroughly discuss their personal history, specifically addressing the documented domestic disputes, and assess their current demeanor and judgment, while also verifying all submitted documentation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed personal interview with the applicant to thoroughly discuss their personal history, specifically addressing the documented domestic disputes, and assess their current demeanor and judgment, while also verifying all submitted documentation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms and the strict legal requirements for obtaining and maintaining a Waffenschein in Germany. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in formal convictions, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to possess a firearm, as it indicates potential issues with impulse control and respect for the law. A thorough and objective assessment is paramount to ensure public safety and adherence to the German Weapons Act, Waffengesetz WaffG. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's personal history, and a direct, in-depth interview to clarify any ambiguities or concerns. This approach aligns with the principles of the WaffG, which mandates that authorities must be convinced of the applicant's reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung, to possess a firearm. Section 5 of the WaffG outlines the criteria for assessing reliability, which includes considering past conduct and any circumstances that might suggest a propensity for misuse. The interview allows for direct observation of the applicant's demeanor and the opportunity to probe sensitive areas, such as the domestic disputes, to gauge their current stability and judgment. This proactive and thorough investigation is crucial for responsible decision-making. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the domestic dispute information as irrelevant simply because no formal charges were filed. This fails to acknowledge that the WaffG's assessment of reliability is not solely based on criminal convictions, but also on any circumstances that raise doubts about an individual's fitness to handle firearms. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the Waffenschein based solely on the absence of a criminal record, without conducting a personal interview to assess the applicant's current suitability and address the red flags raised by the domestic disputes. This bypasses a critical step in the due diligence process required by German firearms law. Finally, an approach that relies on hearsay or unsubstantiated rumors without seeking direct clarification from the applicant or official records would also be professionally unacceptable and legally unsound. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes thoroughness and objectivity. This involves meticulously reviewing all available information, identifying potential risks or inconsistencies, and then employing appropriate investigative methods, such as interviews, to resolve these issues. The ultimate decision must be grounded in the specific requirements of the WaffG, focusing on the applicant's demonstrated reliability and suitability, with public safety as the overriding consideration. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that an applicant for a firearms license, Waffenschein in Bavaria, Germany, has a history of 3 reported domestic disputes within the last 5 years. While none of these incidents resulted in criminal charges or convictions, the applicant claims they were minor misunderstandings that have been resolved. The licensing authority is tasked with determining the applicant's suitability. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with German firearms regulations and upholds public safety? Option A. Issue a warning to the applicant about the reported disputes but proceed with granting the license, assuming the applicant's claims of resolution are sufficient without further investigation. Option B. Thoroughly investigate all reported incidents by obtaining and reviewing police reports and any available witness statements related to the domestic disputes, alongside the applicant's formal application, to assess their overall reliability and personal suitability as required by the Waffengesetz. Option C. Grant the firearms license based on the applicant's assurance that the disputes were minor and resolved, as there are no criminal convictions on record. Option D. Dismiss the domestic dispute reports entirely because they did not lead to formal charges or convictions, and proceed with processing the application based solely on the absence of a criminal record. The correct answer is B. Thoroughly investigate all reported incidents by obtaining and reviewing police reports and any available witness statements related to the domestic disputes, alongside the applicant's formal application, to assess their overall reliability and personal suitability as required by the Waffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to self-defense and the state's responsibility to maintain public safety through strict regulation of firearms. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in criminal convictions, raises significant concerns about their temperament and potential for impulsive or aggressive behavior, which are critical factors in assessing suitability for a firearms license in Germany. A thorough and objective evaluation is paramount to prevent potential misuse of a firearm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes public safety by thoroughly investigating all reported incidents, regardless of formal conviction. This approach aligns with the principles of the German Waffengesetz, WAFG, which mandates that authorities assess the applicant's reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche Eignung. The WAFG requires a holistic review of an applicant's background, including any indications of instability or propensity for violence, even if not leading to criminal charges. Therefore, obtaining and reviewing all available documentation, including police reports and witness statements related to the domestic disputes, is essential for a responsible decision. This ensures that the licensing authority has a complete picture of the applicant's character and potential risks. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the absence of criminal convictions. This fails to meet the WAFG's requirement for assessing personal suitability and reliability, as it ignores potential behavioral red flags that do not culminate in a criminal record. Domestic disputes, even without convictions, can indicate underlying issues that make an individual unsuitable for firearm possession. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license based on the applicant's assertion that the disputes were minor and resolved. This approach abdicates the authority's responsibility to conduct an independent and objective investigation. Personal assurances are insufficient when public safety is at stake. The authority must verify information and assess risk through documented evidence. A further incorrect approach would be to dismiss the domestic dispute reports outright because they did not lead to formal charges. This is a failure to exercise due diligence. The WAFG requires a proactive assessment of an applicant's character, and ignoring relevant information, even if not legally conclusive, is a dereliction of that duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal requirements, e.g., WAFG provisions on reliability and suitability. 2. Proactively seeking and meticulously reviewing all available information, including police records, reports, and statements, even if they do not constitute criminal convictions. 3. Objectively assessing the information against the legal criteria for suitability, considering any patterns of behavior or potential risks. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for granting or denying the license, to ensure transparency and accountability. The paramount consideration must always be the safety of the public. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that a firearms dealer in Bavaria, Germany, is presented with a potential customer who wishes to purchase a hunting rifle. The customer claims to possess a valid firearms license, Waffenschein, and a hunting permit, but states they have left these documents at home and can provide them within 24 hours. The dealer is eager to complete the sale as the customer appears reputable and the rifle is in high demand. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms dealer in accordance with German firearms regulations? Option A. Politely decline the sale at this time and inform the customer that the transaction can only proceed once valid, verifiable documentation of their firearms license and any necessary permits, as required by the Waffengesetz, WAFG, has been presented and thoroughly checked. Option B. Proceed with the sale, accepting the customer's verbal assurance and a written promise to provide the necessary documents within 24 hours, with the understanding that the documents will be submitted for verification immediately upon receipt. Option C. Accept an expired firearms license as sufficient for the sale, provided the customer promises to renew it promptly, as the intent to hunt is clear. Option D. Expedite the sale by accepting slightly mismatched identification details with the firearms license, assuming these are minor administrative oversights, to facilitate the transaction. The correct answer is A. Politely decline the sale at this time and inform the customer that the transaction can only proceed once valid, verifiable documentation of their firearms license and any necessary permits, as required by the Waffengesetz (WAFG), has been presented and thoroughly checked. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent sensitivity of firearms and the legal framework governing their possession and use in Germany. A firearms dealer must navigate a complex web of regulations, ethical considerations, and customer interactions to ensure compliance and public safety. The pressure to complete a sale, coupled with the responsibility of verifying a customer's eligibility, requires meticulous attention to detail and a robust understanding of the Waffengesetz (WAFG). Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented verification of the customer's firearms license, Waffenschein, and any associated permits, ensuring they are valid and appropriate for the intended firearm. This includes cross-referencing the license details with the specific firearm being purchased, confirming the customer's identity, and adhering to all mandatory waiting periods and registration requirements as stipulated by the WAFG. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal obligations of a firearms dealer under German law, prioritizing public safety and preventing unauthorized access to firearms. The WAFG mandates strict checks to ensure that only individuals with a legitimate need and the necessary qualifications can acquire firearms. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the sale based solely on the customer's verbal assurance of possessing a valid license and a promise to provide it later. This is professionally unacceptable as it bypasses the legally mandated verification process. The WAFG requires tangible proof of eligibility, not mere assurances. This failure to verify can lead to serious legal repercussions for the dealer and, more importantly, could result in a firearm falling into the wrong hands. Another incorrect approach is to accept an expired or incomplete firearms license as sufficient for the sale. The WAFG specifies that licenses must be current and cover the type of firearm being purchased. Accepting an invalid document demonstrates a disregard for legal requirements and a failure to exercise due diligence, exposing both the dealer and the public to risk. A further incorrect approach is to expedite the sale by overlooking minor discrepancies in the customer's identification or license details, assuming they are unintentional errors. While minor errors can occur, a firearms dealer has a duty to ensure all documentation is accurate and verifiable. Overlooking discrepancies, even if seemingly minor, can mask attempts at fraudulent acquisition and violates the principle of strict compliance with the WAFG. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above all else. This involves a proactive approach to understanding and adhering to the WAFG, maintaining up-to-date knowledge of its provisions, and implementing rigorous internal procedures for customer verification. When faced with uncertainty or potential noncompliance, the professional decision is always to err on the side of caution, which may mean delaying or refusing a sale until all legal requirements are unequivocally met. This framework emphasizes due diligence, meticulous record-keeping, and a commitment to ethical conduct in a highly regulated industry. Question 18. The control framework reveals that a German citizen who holds a valid Waffenschein firearms license for self-defense has recently been convicted of a minor traffic violation involving a fine but no imprisonment. The applicant has otherwise maintained a clean record for over a decade. The local firearms authority is now reviewing the renewal application for the Waffenschein. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms authority? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's overall reliability and suitability for firearm possession, considering the nature and recency of the traffic violation and any other relevant factors, before making a decision on the Waffenschein renewal. Option B. Immediately revoke the Waffenschein due to the existence of a criminal conviction, regardless of its minor nature or the applicant's otherwise clean record. Option C. Require the applicant to undergo a new, extensive psychological evaluation solely because of the traffic violation, as a prerequisite for renewal. Option D. Renew the Waffenschein without further investigation, assuming that a minor traffic violation does not impact an individual's trustworthiness for firearm possession. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's overall reliability and suitability for firearm possession, considering the nature and recency of the traffic violation and any other relevant factors, before making a decision on the Waffenschein renewal. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an individual's right to carry a firearm in Germany is being re-evaluated due to a recent, albeit minor, conviction. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced interpretation of the German Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG, and its associated regulations, balancing public safety concerns with an individual's legal rights. The core of the challenge lies in determining whether the specific offense, its recency, and the individual's overall character warrant a revocation or suspension of their Waffenschein. Considering the strict requirements for firearm possession, the best approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's suitability, focusing on the specific nature of the offense and its implications for their reliability and trustworthiness as a firearm holder. This means meticulously reviewing the details of the conviction, considering the time elapsed since the offense, and evaluating any evidence of rehabilitation or ongoing risk. The German Firearms Act WaffG, particularly sections concerning reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and suitability, mandates that authorities must be convinced of the applicant's trustworthiness. A minor conviction, depending on its nature and context, might not automatically render an individual unreliable, especially if sufficient time has passed and there is no indication of recidivism or ongoing issues. The authority must demonstrate a concrete, demonstrable reason based on the law to deny or revoke the permit. An incorrect approach would be to automatically revoke the Waffenschein solely based on the existence of any conviction, regardless of its severity or recency. This fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality and the specific criteria for assessing reliability under the WaffG. Another incorrect approach would be to grant a renewal without any review of the conviction, effectively ignoring a potentially relevant event that could impact the applicant's suitability. This would be a dereliction of the authority's duty to ensure public safety. Finally, making a decision based on personal bias or generalized assumptions about individuals with past convictions, rather than on the specific facts and legal requirements, is ethically and legally unacceptable. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a fact-based, legally compliant, and individualized assessment. This involves 1. Gathering all relevant information about the conviction and the applicant's circumstances. 2. Consulting the specific provisions of the Waffengesetz pertaining to reliability and suitability. 3. Applying a proportionality test, considering the nature, severity, and recency of the offense against the requirements for firearm possession. 4. Documenting the decision-making process thoroughly, providing clear justification based on legal grounds. 5. Considering any mitigating or aggravating factors presented by the applicant. Question 19. Which approach would be most appropriate for a German firearms authority when evaluating an application for a Waffenschein from an individual who claims to be under a credible threat of serious harm, but has not yet provided extensive corroborating evidence? Option A. Approve the Waffenschein based on a brief interview and the applicant's assurance that they are in danger to avoid delaying the process. Option B. Deny the application immediately due to the applicant's profession, which is known to carry some risks, without further investigation into specific threats. Option C. Issue the Waffenschein based on the applicant's subjective fear and the perceived urgency of their situation, as personal safety is paramount. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive and documented investigation into the applicant's claims, meticulously verifying the existence of a concrete and current threat that cannot be mitigated by less restrictive means, in strict accordance with the provisions of the German Waffengesetz regarding Berechtigungsinteresse. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive and documented investigation into the applicant's claims, meticulously verifying the existence of a concrete and current threat that cannot be mitigated by less restrictive means, in strict accordance with the provisions of the German Waffengesetz regarding Berechtigungsinteresse. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing an individual's stated need for self-defense with the stringent requirements and public safety considerations inherent in German firearms law. The applicant's perceived threat, while real to them, must be objectively assessed against the legal thresholds for issuing a Waffenschein. Misjudging this balance could lead to either an unwarranted issuance of a permit, compromising public safety, or an unjustified denial, potentially leaving a law-abiding citizen vulnerable. Careful judgment is required to ensure adherence to the German Waffengesetz, WaffG, and its associated ordinances, particularly concerning the necessity and proportionality of carrying a firearm. The best approach involves a thorough, objective, and documented assessment of the applicant's stated need for self-defense, rigorously applying the criteria outlined in the German Waffengesetz. This includes verifying the existence of a demonstrable, concrete, and current threat that cannot be adequately mitigated by other means. The authorities must meticulously examine evidence provided by the applicant, conduct background checks, and consult with relevant law enforcement agencies to corroborate the threat's credibility and severity. The decision must be based on whether the applicant has proven a Berechtigungsinteresse, legitimate interest, for carrying a firearm, as defined by Section 28 WAF-G, which typically requires demonstrating an exceptional need for protection beyond that of the general public. This systematic and evidence-based evaluation ensures compliance with the law's intent to permit firearm possession only when demonstrably necessary for self-preservation against specific, serious threats. An approach that relies solely on the applicant's subjective fear or a generalized sense of insecurity is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the legal requirement for an objective and concrete threat, as mandated by the WAF-G. Such an approach would disregard the principle of proportionality and the public safety imperative, potentially leading to the issuance of permits based on emotional distress rather than demonstrable need. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the application summarily based on the applicant's profession alone, without a thorough investigation into the specific threats they face. While certain professions may carry inherent risks, the WAF-G requires an individualized assessment of the applicant's circumstances. Blanket denials without due diligence are contrary to the principles of fair administrative process and the specific provisions for assessing legitimate interest. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, such as approving the permit based on minimal documentation or informal assurances, is also unacceptable. This undermines the integrity of the licensing process and the rigorous standards set by German firearms legislation, creating a significant risk to public safety by potentially arming individuals who have not met the stringent legal requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal requirements for a Waffenschein. This involves identifying the specific provisions of the WAF-G and relevant ordinances that govern the assessment of Berechtigungsinteresse. The process should then involve gathering all available evidence, objectively evaluating its credibility and relevance to the legal criteria, and documenting every step of the assessment. Consultation with legal experts and law enforcement colleagues can provide valuable insights. The final decision must be justifiable based on the evidence and the law, ensuring both the applicant's rights and the public's safety are appropriately considered. Question 20. Investigation of a firearms license application in Bavaria, Germany, reveals the applicant is requesting a permit for a handgun and 2 additional hunting rifles. The current administrative fee schedule for firearms licenses in Bavaria, as per the relevant German administrative fee regulations, states a base fee of Euros 60 for a standard permit and an additional fee of Euros 20 for each firearm listed beyond the first. What is the total fee the applicant must pay for this firearms license? Option A, Euros 100. Option B, Euros 180. Option C, Euros 80. Option D, Euros 120. The correct answer is A, Euros 100. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the need to accurately calculate and interpret firearms license fees based on specific legal provisions in Germany. Misinterpreting the fee structure or applying incorrect calculation methods can lead to financial penalties for the applicant and potential regulatory noncompliance for the issuing authority. The professional must demonstrate meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of the relevant sections of the German Waffengesetz, WAF-G, and associated fee schedules. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a precise calculation of the firearms license fee by identifying the base fee for a standard permit, and then adding the supplementary fee for each additional firearm listed on the permit. As stipulated by the relevant German administrative fee regulations, Verwaltungsgebührenordnung. This method directly applies the legal framework for fee determination, ensuring accuracy and compliance. The calculation would be base fee plus number of additional firearms * fee per additional firearm. For instance, if the base fee is Euros 50 and the fee per additional firearm is Euros 15, and the applicant lists 3 additional firearms, the total fee would be \50 plus 3 backslash times 15 equals 50 plus 45 equals 95 backslash euros. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the codified fee structure established by German law for firearms permits. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely applies a flat fee without considering the number of additional firearms is incorrect because it fails to account for the tiered fee structure mandated by German regulations. This would result in an underpayment of the required fee, leading to noncompliance. An approach that calculates the fee based on the total number of firearms as if each were a separate permit, rather than applying a base fee plus a supplementary fee for additional firearms, is also incorrect. This would lead to an overpayment and misapplication of the fee schedule, demonstrating a misunderstanding of how the fees are structured for multiple firearms on a single permit. An approach that uses an arbitrary percentage increase for each additional firearm, not tied to any specific legal provision or fee schedule, is fundamentally flawed. This method lacks any legal basis and would result in an inaccurate and non-compliant fee assessment. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic approach to fee calculation. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal provisions governing firearms license fees in Germany, e.g., relevant sections of the WAFG and associated administrative fee ordinances. 2. Determining the applicable base fee for the permit. 3. Accurately counting the number of additional firearms to be listed. 4. Applying the legally defined supplementary fee for each additional firearm. 5. Performing the calculation precisely. 6. Documenting the calculation process for transparency and auditability. This structured approach ensures both legal compliance and financial accuracy.